It's good to be back.
This is our wrap-up episode, right? Our seasonal wrap-up episode. So we're going to revisit some of the topics that caught our fancy this past season, delve into some news stories, and try to tie it all together.
Yeah, trying to write a thesis at the last hour.
I mean, that was my MO in undergrad.
Was last minute?
Procrastination, yes. I can't
That was not my MO. My MO was 2 weeks in advance. I had an outline, and I would write a paragraph each day, and then I would spend the last week editing.
So what you're saying is we're polar opposites.
Yes.
Okay.
So we're going to have great takes on these conversations that we've had. So the first one I wanted to start with was we had kind of similar conversations with two different attorneys, both Doug Schaefer and Austin Ward, who are both plaintiffs' attorneys. And I wanted to know from you, what kind of stood out to you? Obviously, you are a plaintiff's attorney, so you have a lot more context in this field of law. What stood out to you in those conversations?
I think probably the biggest overarching theme between both of those conversations is I would call it like an attack on access to the civil justice system. And what that means for people who are seeking justice. So whether we're talking about caps on attorneys' fees or whether we're talking about now in the wake of this new lawsuit that attorneys for Uber have filed against a couple of attorneys' offices and doctors' offices, a quote unquote civil RICO suit. I think what we have to be on guard against, not just in my profession, because obviously I'm a personal injury attorney, plaintiff personal injury attorney, but I think in society writ large is making sure that we as Americans still have access to the civil justice system as we were meant to have and as it's constitutionally protected. We're back with another episode of the It's Personal podcast. I'm Christopher Adamson.
This is personal injury. It is personal. So the contingency fee agreements, the fact that we have this as part of our legal system is truly incredible, and one of the very few areas in our economy where it doesn't matter who you are. You could be homeless, destitute, on the side of the street, barely able to string words together, and you can have access to the highest quality legal representation that money could possibly buy because of contingency fees. That's why. So this is a strategy that's now kind of being adopted by insurance companies through their lobbying organizations to try to figure out how they can reduce that fact and hurt that ability for individuals to get high quality representation.
I think, again, everyone remembers from civics classes, right? There's the legislative branch, the judiciary branch, and the executive branch. And they're all supposed to provide checks and balances against one another. And unfortunately, in my opinion, this current administration is kind of wreaking havoc on some of those old, some of these civics ideals or these ideals that we learned in civics class. And it's having a domino effect because it's really a top-down effect. Obviously, the president is, quote unquote, the highest office in the land. He's the chief executive in the land. And as he goes, so goes the rest of the country, the rest of the politicians, as we've seen. And a lot of his actions are having a trickle-down effect that is being felt down here at the ground level for us as the average American citizen. So I think now law firms will feel more emboldened to engage in what I'll call attacks on a certain profession or engage in attacks on plaintiff personal injury attorneys by filing a civil RICO lawsuit and saying these law firms, these doctors, these clients, these people are all acting in collusion to somehow subvert the civil justice system. And they might be able to cherry pick one or two situations and use them as fodder in a complaint that gets filed, and it becomes a public filing, and then blast that out to the populace. And then people read these allegations and they say, oh my God, this is so egregious, when at the end of the day, that's not really what the profession is.
Right.
And that lawsuit is being used to paint a picture that the entire...
And this lawsuit you're talking about is this current lawsuit that Uber has just filed.
Uber has filed a lawsuit against a couple of plaintiff personal injury firms in Los Angeles, a doctor, I believe, a doctor's office, a surgery center. And essentially the allegations are all these individuals are colluding together to engage in some sort of whatever you want to call it, fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. It's similar to a criminal RICO, just in a civil sense. And obviously I'm not a criminal expert. I'm not even like a civil RICO expert, but just in broad strokes, what they're alleging is some sort of civil corrupt enterprise that involves kickbacks potentially, or people, making illegal money or taking bribes or something to that effect. But really, I think the goal of the lawsuit is to paint our profession in a certain light, to continue to...
and this isn't the first time that this has happened. That's why I think it's interesting to bring that up here, because what I, as much more of a novice about most of this than all of you guys, what I really took from the conversation with Doug Schaefer was this has been going on forever. Like, it is as old as the profession, nearly. And there was a case he talked about with Philip Morris in the tobacco industry.
He's the attorney that hit the tobacco industry for $28 billion. Still the largest TI verdict in American history. This was in around the early 2000s.
Yeah, $20 billion in early 2000s.
$28 billion.
Yeah.
And that was his second one. His first one was for $3 billion.
Yeah.
He hit them back to back.
Yeah.
For billions of dollars. And
so he was pretty unpopular with them.
Yeah. Well, there's a famous interview after the verdict because the ratios weren't going to stand up, right? I mean,
the punitive verdict.
Punitive verdict, right. And they knew it. But Mike didn't care. Mike was, I watched the closing argument of that $28 billion verdict. And one of his famous lines when he got to the numbers, he told the jury, don't you worry about how it's going to be paid. That Philip Morris is going to appeal this to the California Court of Appeal, the California Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court, and then the Galactic Supreme Court. But that's not for you. Like, your job is to send a message so loud that everybody at Philip Morris hears it. And they did. And so this was funny afterwards. One of the chairmen of Philip Morris says, we're not going to let Mike Hughes bully us.
One guy against the entire tobacco industry.
Pretty interesting. Was there anything about that? Did you know that, like, this $28 billion suit against Philip Morris and how that sort of went down? Was that a story you had already learned? Or?
Yeah, I mean, that lawsuit kind of predates me. I was familiar with it in general terms. Obviously, Doug knows a lot more of the particulars, but in essence, there was somebody who basically sued the tobacco industry who was saying that these, like, cigarettes are harmful, nicotine is harmful, you're engaging in harmful deceptive practices that you're aware of as the tobacco company, like, they're harmful, yet you're selling this harmful product to Americans, and it's leading to more and more deaths every single year, right? Cigarettes are a carcinogen. Everybody knows that now. But it was really an opportunity for this one attorney to try to strike back against an entire industry and say, this is wrong. What you're doing is basically selling death to the American population. And he was successful, and he got a huge verdict. And from what I remember, that verdict became the catalyst for a Supreme Court decision that reduced the verdict down, because it basically said, when there's a case where you have punitive damages, so damages that are meant to punish the defendant for bad actions, the multiplier in terms of the damages has to be within a certain amount. So, like, in that case, if there's compensatory damages and punitive damages. So the compensatory damages are basically to make up for what happened, and the punitive damages are to punish the defendant for their actions. So if the compensatory damages are 1 million, if the punitive damages are 50 million, that multiplier is 50 times, right? And so the Supreme Court case says it can't be greater than 10 times, I think. So that case was also famous for establishing this precedent that punitive damages have to be within a certain
And yet,
multiplier.
even though the tobacco industry and Philip Morris had obviously played a large role in millions of deaths and poor marketing and all of that, but they still turned around and said, that's what I thought was funny from the conversation with Doug, was they still turned around and said, we're not going to let him bully us.
Right.
As if this one attorney and then we sort of see this relationship between PI attorneys and corporations, right? This, oftentimes either one person or a small team against mega rich corporations like Uber, right? And Uber sort of taking this same attitude where they're turning, they're using marketing tactics to paint this industry in certain lights in order to tell a narrative so that they have the public on their side. And we even see that in what's going on with Nevada, right? Where they're funding, they're the only funding for this PAC that's trying to pass a measure to protect people from trial lawyers who are, quote, getting rich at the expense of plaintiffs and everyone else.
Yeah, and I think what you said about marketing is very astute, because this is all about spin, right? And setting yourself up as somebody who's being attacked or unfairly victimized by these plaintiffs' attorneys who are only out to get rich or put one over on the civil justice system, et cetera.
And it's utilizing a narrative that, what we saw in the other conversation with Austin as well, right, is people's feelings towards attorneys is as old as Shakespeare, if not longer, right? So it's not difficult to spin that narrative. It's just, I think what is interesting is how consistently and how differently these companies have had to do it. Because Doug also talked about in that episode, medical malpractice and tort reform. Can you speak a little bit to what that conversation was about and why that also kind of plays a role here in this Uber?
Yeah, that
lawsuit?
conversation, it really discussed kind of the genesis of tort reform in the medical malpractice arena. So in the state of California, similar to a lot of states across the nation here, I think it was in the 60s or the 70s, there was tort reform, and tort basically refers to negligence and what we do as plaintiff personal injury attorneys. So tort reform meaning that we as doctors think that there's too many lawsuits, there's too many medical malpractice lawsuits that are holding us responsible for medical negligence. It's causing our insurance premiums to go up, which that was part of the narrative or part of the spin. And then they would say that because our premiums are going up, it affects our ability to provide services to the community. So when they use lobbying groups or PR groups or whatever to put that narrative out there in TV commercials, and then there's a measure that comes up on the ballot or a legislative opportunity to change the law, which in California, what ended up happening is the law was changed to cap attorney's fees in medical malpractice cases and to cap damages, right? Or to cap damages in medical malpractice cases. And so what happens when you cap damages in medical malpractice cases? So at the time, those damages for pain and suffering were capped at, I think it was $250,000. Right. So what that means is no matter how egregious the malpractice, the most you could ever recover for pain and suffering, what you would think of as emotional distress, like loss of enjoyment of life, the fact you had to endure physical pain, mental suffering, et cetera, those damages were capped at $250,000. So no matter, again, how egregious the injury, how egregious the medical malpractice, you could not recover more than that. So as plaintiffs' attorneys, when there is a ceiling on how much you can recover in damages, no matter how bad those damages are, is going to have the effect of driving people out of the profession, because now they say, if what I can potentially earn in this area of law is artificially capped because of this law, now my time, energy, resources are better spent elsewhere, because there's these other areas of law where damages aren't capped, where I can still make money that's commensurate with the harm that has occurred.
And not just commensurate with the harm, but also, and this is taking back to Austin, why I think these conversations go really well together, is what I thought he covered well was the sheer money it takes to also litigate.
Right.
Period. Right. So because $250,000 sounds like a lot of money, but also when you add up all of the charges, all of the experts, all of the things that it takes to actually win a trial, like that that $250K is now a drop in the bucket compared to what that firm is going to have to spend in order to win a case, right?
Yeah. So what I think is insurance companies, lobbyists, et cetera, are very adept at being able to spin a certain narrative to paint things a certain way.
Right.
And that $250,000, just as an aside, has never been indexed for inflation until recently. I think now it's up to like 300 something, right? But for like 30, 40 years, that number never went up. So even though the cost of living has gone up, right, and the consumer price index and all those things, that measure of damages never went up. And so that's just, another kernel that speaks to the injustice of capping those damages and then never raising them, right? And so then getting back to your point, like what you're talking about has to do with on the back end, what people don't see when plaintiff attorneys are prosecuting cases, it's not just time and energy and resources, it's also money. So for us, and what Austin talked about on that episode is if we sign up a case, like when we file the lawsuit, there's a lot of expenses that come along with that. Like we're paying money to take depositions. We're paying money to retain expert witnesses. We're paying money to depose expert witnesses. We're paying money to bring our witnesses to trial. We're paying money to try the case. So like by the time, if you just take like an average size case, by the time it gets to trial and we try the case, like it might cost us another $250,000 just to try the case, in addition to the other expenses that we've incurred. But as I think, as good as the defense attorneys and insurance companies and insurance industries have spun a narrative on their side, one of the shortfalls of the plaintiff attorney industry, not just in California but probably nationwide, is that we don't have like a national, lobbying or party or group or something like that speaks on our behalf. Like we're not out there with the ability to nationally craft our story or tell our story or just explain to people like what happens on the back end, like how that sausage is made. So like they don't understand that, of that, let's say there's a case where damages are capped at $250,000, and then you can also get economic damages, because that $250,000 cap is on non-economic damages, which means pain and suffering, emotional distress. Economic damages are not capped. So if you have a case where somebody has high past medical bills, high future medical bills are going to require a lot of future treatment, that's uncapped. So like, let's say you had a case where they had another $500,000 in past and future medical bills, and then you get that $250,000, so it's a $750,000 settlement. Like that might sound like a lot of money to people, but out of that pot of money, like the client gets paid, we take attorney's fees and costs, because how we're compensated is that we don't just recoup the money that we paid out of pocket. And that's another thing that a lot of people don't understand. Like we work on contingency. Right. So in every case, it's a literal roll of the dice that we're going to be able to resolve this case favorably for our client. And when I say favorably, I mean for an amount of money that enables the client to walk away with money that's it might not even approximate what's happened to that person. Because a lot of times, not even in death cases, but in cases where people suffer physical injuries, something has been taken away from them that they'll never get back, some aspect of their physicality. And like money to try to fix and make up for or compensate that there's no amount of money, right? But like in that situation, let's say it's a $750,000 settlement. There's again, our attorney's fees. So the percentage that, because we work on contingency, we take a percentage of the entire recovery. And so we have our attorney's fees and we recoup our costs. So that 700 or whatever the amount of money is, it has to make sure that we can take our attorney's fees and costs. If there's healthcare providers or doctors' bills that have to get paid back, they get paid back and the client gets paid. So oftentimes I think from the outside looking in, like a lot of times people just like see a newspaper article or an alert on their phone now or be like, oh, this $50 million settlement or, $10 million verdict or something like that. And they'll think that just means like money falling from the sky for the client. But that all that money doesn't go to the client. That money is getting divvied up, and rightfully so, amongst the attorneys who worked hard, very hard, to get that settlement or verdict against it. It's getting divvied up to doctors and other providers who provided medical treatment, and to the client.
And that's something else that Austin talked about in his episode, right? Like, if you make this area of law, which we saw with medical malpractice already happen, if you make it less lucrative, right? These really high quality attorneys that could go fight, could go join Uber and, join a fight that maybe isn't actually beneficial to most people. These high quality lawyers are going to have to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they have mortgages to pay, they have lives to live. And also, they aren't charging their hourly rates up front, and sometimes they never even get paid. So the way that this system has to work in order for everyone to be able to achieve the way that the system has to work for everybody to be able to receive good representation in civil suits is for something like this, right? For contingency where that person wouldn't owe it back if they didn't win, because they can't afford $300K or $500K or $1 million, depending on whatever that firm had to spend in order to actually try that lawsuit.
And in contrast, oftentimes defense attorneys, they are either getting a flat retainer up front, so they're getting money up front from the insurance company, or they're billing hours, and then they're getting paid for their billable hours. So they are getting paid for their time, right? We're investing tons of hours into these cases for the prospect of like an opportunity to favorably resolve the case. And like you mentioned, if we take away these opportunities, like if we have attorneys' fees caps or caps on damages, now these attorneys who, in my opinion and in my experience, plaintiff personal injury attorneys are some of the most passionate people you'll ever meet about what they do.
We've seen that.
And now you're taking these people, and like you mentioned, now they have to go and move into a different area of law. Like, that's sad. They no longer potentially get to do this thing that's why they get out of bed every single day, is to stand up and fight on behalf of the people they represent, to right these wrongs that they see that are going on behind the scenes. So now, like, these people who are so passionate, you're saying you can't do this anymore. And there's like no other profession on earth and in the United States of America where we tell people like, oh, if you're passionate about this, we have to figure out a way that you can't do it. Like we have to figure out a way to make it less lucrative. Like there's other professions, like we celebrate athletes all the time who rise to the pinnacle of excellence in their profession and say, whatever that person's like earning, they're probably not being paid enough, or they're worth every penny because they're so good at what they do, or they're winning championships or whatever. But like, for whatever reason, when it comes to lawyers, especially like contingency attorneys, they get pilloried, right, by the press, or they get vilified.
And I think that, we even heard that in Saad's and Daniel's episode, right, when like they were both former public defenders, and them feeling the freedom as a plaintiff's attorney to, continue doing what they want, which is fighting for the everyday person,
right,
and fighting corporations and fighting bad actors, right? Like, but now they have ideally more tools and flexibility than in the criminal justice system, where their hands are often more tied and resources are much smaller.
Right.
Which is, I think just not, I don't think we hear about those comparisons too often. So going back and just wrapping up this new lawsuit that's going on. Actually, no, before I do that, anything surprise you about these conversations with Doug or Austin or even Saad and Daniel, which I know we'll get into a little bit later?
I don't think anything really surprised me. It's just more so it's cool to kind of see a different perspective or a different spin on like the things that I personally believe, or like the things that I've seen. So like one of the things I really enjoyed the most about the conversations that we have is seeing like the same passion that I have for this profession reflected in other people, but just in different ways. So I think that's really cool and really special. Yeah.
Okay. So wrapping up with this Uber lawsuit, just take us through, I guess, very, very briefly. So there's a couple things going on with this lawsuit. So they're suing a law firm in Los Angeles, as well as a few other actors in what is like civil RICO charges, and remind us what RICO is.
RICO stands for Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization Act, I believe. And so it's basically like, in a criminal sense, what you're alleging is there's a criminal enterprise. So the mob is a classic example that people know of or can think of for reference. So at the top, you have the Godfather, like the Vito Corleone type. And underneath the guy at the top, there's typically some what they call, captains or consiglieri, something like that. So if you imagine like one guy at the top and then one line down, there's like 3 other guys that are next to the guy at the top, another line down, there might be 8 other guys, and another line down, there might be 10 other guys. Exactly. So it's like a pyramid, and it all leads back to this person at the top. And so I don't think the RICO law was actually devised for the mob. I think from what I remember and what I read, there was a law that had been on the books for a long time that was just kind of sitting there stale. And then the FBI was like trying to figure out how they could take down the mob. And I think there was a law professor actually who was like, there's this law that this is what it is and this is what you can use it to do. And you can employ it to kind of take down the mob. Because the problem is, this guy who's at the top oftentimes has plausible deniability for these things that are going on down here. Right. But what RICO says is that this entire thing is a criminal enterprise.
Right.
So these low-level things that are going on down here, like imagine if there's somebody on the street who's selling drugs, like one guy on the street who's selling drugs, this person at the top might not have had a direct conversation with this guy and say, hey, sell these drugs on the corner. But as part of this entire criminal enterprise, what this guy is doing is in furtherance of this entire criminal enterprise. And if you're the guy at the top, who they call the kingpin, that means you're responsible for everything that happens at every level. So they use that to roll up the entire enterprise. And typically what law enforcement does is they target these lower level guys and then get them to start flipping on people above them so they can keep going up the chain to finally get to this person. So
it would make a civil, like what's the difference then?
I mean, I think in a civil RICO, they're alleging also that there's just some sort of corrupt organizer enterprise that's going on. And in this case, it might just be civil corruption because they're alleging that I think there's 2 law firms actually that were named. So like these 2 law firms individually, so it might be one law firm is colluding with this doctor and this doctor's office to somehow defraud the public or their patients or something like that through manipulated billing practices or unfair billing practices or through some sort of kickback scheme between the 2 of them, et cetera. In my opinion, like this whole thing is it's because there has been so much in the press about criminal RICOs that they said, let's file a civil RICO because we know that's also going to get headlines and be splashy. And 2, kind of as a corollary, I think it's a publicity stunt.
Right.
Like, do I condone people misusing the civil justice system? Of course not. Right. So I just want to make that clear. But at the same time, I also think there are firms out there that are going to try to use what's gone on like in the press to do things to grab headlines and continue to exploit public opinion or turn public opinion against plaintiff personal injury attorneys, because like the average citizen probably isn't going to take the time to actually read that lawsuit. I think that lawsuit was like 60 pages. Yeah. So the average citizen isn't going to take the time to read that lawsuit or think critically about it or whether the allegations in it are even true. They're just going to read chunks or see sound bites or see whatever, like these.
Right. And they're utilizing that same thing we were talking about earlier, which is like the public perception of lawyers already is not great. So it's easy to manipulate that.
They're like, it's an easy target, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of it has to do with that. Like, do I think the lawsuit actually has much of a leg to stand on? No.
There was something interesting that I found in my research on this suit. There's a law professor at the University of Minnesota who studies contingency fees specifically, and his take on specifically what Uber's doing, not just really with this case, but more what they were doing in Nevada with the sexual assault charges and trying to cap attorney's fees. He said, this would basically be slamming the door of the courthouse on individuals who are harmed. I thought that was a pretty affirmative, contingency. Like, we can dance around the subject as much as you want, Uber, but at the end of the day, capping fees is equivalent to saying that not everyone should be able to get justice.
Right.
And that I, as a corporate entity, don't need to be held accountable.
I think for me, that's maybe not necessarily the bigger deal, but also that's a huge factor, right? Because what we do is holding people accountable who refuse to be responsible. And so if you as Uber have drivers who are potentially responsible for causing injuries or, God forbid, some sort of sexual assault or something like that, wouldn't you want to be held responsible as a corporation? Like, I don't.
Well, and there was reports recently that Uber employees know. Like, they've known for years what's been going on, especially in regards to the sexual assault cases and suits, that they're very aware of what in their own system algorithmically is leading to them. And to some degree, you can't stop everything, but they've tried to do nothing. Like, for example, like Lyft has the opportunity for riders to choose women drivers and they knew that could help, and they never did it.
Yeah.
So like they were very actively not pursuing a thing that was harming their company, which is interesting, and rather putting their money and efforts into Nevadans for Fair Recovery, which is, this fake PAC.
To me, see, like when you say they knew about it and they chose not to do about it or to do other things like put money into a PAC, that harkens back to that social media post we had about the Ford Pinto. Yeah. Because remember the Ford Pinto, what ended up happening was that Ford had designed this car, and then they knew that, like, after they had actually put it into production and designed it, then they figured out that the placement of the gas tank was in such a precarious position that if the car got rear-ended, like, the entire car would explode. And they knew this, right? So then they had to go through this calculus of, well, they didn't have to. They chose to. They said, how much is a recall? Yeah. How much would a recall cost us versus if we anticipate this many incidents will occur or this many deaths or this many injuries, how much will we have to pay out in settlements, lawsuits, whatever? And they said that the amount of the recall was more than what they anticipated they would have to pay out. So then they left the car in production or let it go into production.
They were wrong.
Because what happened? Somebody sued them, an attorney sued them, and in the discovery process found out that they knew beforehand. They had this information beforehand, and they chose to make this decision.
And this happens over and over. Have you seen
what you said with Uber? Like, they knew this stuff was happening on the back end, but they chose to ignore it, not do anything about it, or do other things that didn't address what's going on.
There's a great episode of American Auto, which I don't know if you've seen. It's the Justin Spitzer show. He did Superstore.
Okay.
But basically, their whole episode is they make a self-driving car that they then realize is racist.
Oh, because you can't see black people.
Exactly.
I did see that.
And so they have this chart. It's so funny. They have a chart where they literally measure human life versus profit. And it's ridiculous, but it's also 100% accurate to like what goes on in these rooms. And I mean, whether or not how you slice it, it's like they are really looking at human life or net profit.
Yeah.
And like, I think when people are like, well, what do we do about it? Well, these are the moments that we have something we can do about it. Like voting for the Nevadans for Fair Recovery, right? Like, do you want to be able to sue Uber if you go through that experience and you get sexually assaulted by a driver? Like, I mean, these stories are harrowing that, and I've seen a lot of TikTok advertisement actually about this suit of people like for law firms trying to obviously give opportunities to clients who may have experienced this. But these are I think where they are very lucky in public perception is that it's really difficult to be on the side where it's like, well, explaining contingents, it's really hard to argue with like nerdy facts. And it's a lot easier to be like, well, lawyers suck.
I mean, that too, but plus like, it's like, we're here trying to explain nerdy facts, and they're just, we're just a car. Like, you can get a car on your phone. Anything. Like, you love what we do, right? Like, we have Uber and Uber Eats, and like, we do all these things that make your life so much better. Yeah. So then it's like, people aren't gonna.
And also, it's so easy to go like, well, you don't want that lawyer to get all that money from that victim, right? Yeah. I mean, and it's like, well, that the 30 to 45 seconds it would take to then think past, well, they're not really taking money from a victim. They're taking money from you because you as a corporation did something wrong.
Yeah.
Like, it is just always hard to be on that side where you're always having to throw out the, well, actually,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't know how we really overcome that, because I think we see that in like the macrocosm of politics as well, where you're like, well, actually, that's not really how the tax code works. And it's just never fun to be that person.
That's also where I was going to go. Like, I think if you take kind of like a 10,000 foot view, like it's, we as a citizenry have a responsibility to think with more nuance and also to just investigate things, right? Like, just don't take things on blind faith. Like, for example, in California, we have the ballot system, right? Or the proposition system, right? Where there's all these propositions that end up on ballots during elections. And then we get bombarded with these commercials that are like, yes on 32, no on 32 and stuff like that. And then people don't know what to do. But like, oftentimes people also don't take the time to actually read the language of the ballot, or even like in a very more cursory fashion. For example, like if whatever your political preference is, like whether it's the California Democrat Party or the California Republican Party, like you can go to your party's platform and oftentimes they'll have a synopsis of these ballots.
Right.
They'll tell you what they.
And there's a lot of independent sites that do it too, and they'll break down the history of them. And like, honestly, even if you're like, okay, I'm bored, I don't want to, like, this doesn't make any sense to me, just at the very least look up who's funding the propositions, because some of them are weird. Like there's what's the one that's like parading as like an HIV or AIDS organization, then you look behind who's actually funding that. Like it just keeps going. There's a lot of like West Hollywood propositions about like rent control, and they're all worded in a way that you're not supposed to get it, so that you don't vote. Like it's just so masterfully done. So I guess overall the thesis being like, it's hard to be on the side of read more and be nerdier, look behind the curtain, because we're all busy and tired. So I get that. But yeah, I think overall these conversations were, to me, very enlightening. And I think we're unfortunately facing in these multiple Uber suits, and I'm sure they won't be the last company to do this. I think just the same thing over and over and over again. Tort reform seems to be a never ending concern for this industry. It's a cycle of tort reform coming back every now and then, whether it's fee caps, whether it's caps on damages. And as plaintiff attorneys, there's a lot of good plaintiff attorney organizations out there, not just in California, but in other states and nationwide, that do a good job of beating back this legislation, because there's infinite amount of money on the other side, oftentimes, that has an interest in trying to get these measures passed and this legislation passed. And so it's important that there's organizations like here in California, CALA, Consumer Attorneys Association of Los Angeles, CAOC, that's another one. It's that's a statewide organization, because CALA is more LA based, and then there's CAOC, which is a statewide plaintiff attorney California organization that actually does a lot of good lobbying work and makes a lot of good legislative headway. And so I think also we as plaintiff attorneys in California, we can do a better job of like educating ourselves about some of these marketing, but also educating ourselves about some of these organizations, how we can help the lobbying efforts they are making, like the things they're doing behind the scenes to really help us as a profession. Because, God forbid the profession goes away, right? And again, we're all passionate about what we do. That's another thing, like probably my last takeaway for the viewer is people in this profession are very passionate about what they do. I know the media and TV shows and movies try to portray us all as like, Harvey Specter on Suits or whatever, just rolling around in a Ferrari. But like, that's not what it is. Like the people who are in this profession who have been in it for a long time, especially, they're very passionate, dedicated individuals who really believe in standing up on behalf of people. We believe in what we do. We believe in fighting for people. We believe in holding people accountable. Holding corporations accountable, insurance companies accountable. And we have, we're in this for the right reasons, and we're doing it for the right reasons. Watch Aaron Brockovich. That's all I'll say. Great play.
Most of the time against plaintiffs, they think they're lying. They think they're exaggerating. They think they're malingering, or they think, well, even if this person's injured, I got injured and nobody gave me any money. So we're starting out behind the eight ball in plaintiff personal injury cases. Criminal defense cases, even though it's innocent until proven guilty, nobody thinks that.
does
Like,
that. Yeah.
every juror, probably like 10 out of 12 jurors are going to think, oh, this person got charged with a crime, so they must have did it. Or the government wouldn't have brought charges or come to trial with these charges unless this person did it. So like all these presumptions of innocence and like people starting off with a fair, unbiased view of the case, like doesn't happen. And
Okay, so the second moment that's really stood out was the episode we did with Saad and Daniel, both former public defenders. And for context, I've seen like every law show ever, but like the one that really stuck out to me about public defense was the Shonda show. For the people.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's like the three everyone in the DA's office versus the three public defenders.
They were like federal prosecutors versus like federal public defenders, yes. I think. Yeah.
And the biggest things that stuck out to me as like a viewer, just with my very limited knowledge of the system, was like public defenders are overworked, underpaid, don't have enough money to actually get the job done, often meet their clients seconds before they have to go and defend. Obviously, exactly what the guys were saying in the pod was like, innocent until proven guilty really doesn't show up. We don't see that there. Yeah. We don't see that actually in court. These people are guilty the moment that they have a case in their hands. And so it was just interesting kind of hearing a lot of confirmation of what I had assumed based from what I've seen on TV. And they even use the term themselves, like the criminal injustice system, that there's a lot working against people when they get in the situation where they have a criminal case against them.
Yeah.
So taking it back, what stood out to you from this conversation, hearing about their time in criminal law?
For me, probably just the fact that it kind of confirmed a lot of things I already knew. Like public defenders are overworked. They have thousands of files on their desks. Yeah. And it can be a really, I think, unforgiving job. It can be a job that can lead to a lot of burnout. And I think the problem is that the criminal justice system in the U.S. is based on a plea bargain system. And there was a podcast that I listened to like years ago that really unpacked this. I can't remember what it was, but I think it was talking about the criminal justice system in like some particular county in Ohio. And they really talked about how, because we're based on a plea bargain system, it affects how prosecutors carry out their jobs. And what I mean by that is, like, so first of all, I think most viewers are probably familiar with what a plea bargain means. It means like we're charging you with this crime that carries this penalty. Like we're charging you with armed robbery. This charge carries a maximum of 20 years. But to avoid going to trial, potentially getting found guilty and getting sentenced to 20 years, we'll offer you a plea bargain of 10 years. So if you accept this deal, then you'll plead guilty, you'll get a 10-year sentence. And depending on the rules of the particular, venue or jurisdiction, you might not have to serve all that time. Although when it comes to federal time, I think there's federal requirements about like you're required to serve, I think 85 or 90% of the time or something like that.
And they do this knowing that the courts are really backed up. They got to get through stuff. And the more they charge, the more years they're stacked up facing somebody. And you talked about that with the A$AP Rocky trial, right? That 24 years, the more likely it is someone will plea out. They don't even have to go to court. They still get what they want, which is a person behind bars and all of that.
And I think what it really does is, in some ways, it usurps your right to a speedy trial, right? You have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. I think it's the Sixth Amendment or the Seventh Amendment. It says you have a right to a speedy trial. And so with everyone who gets arrested and charged with a crime, like if you were to just take LA County, everyone who got arrested and charged with a crime, if all of those people elected to go to trial, we wouldn't have the resources like judges, jurors, courtrooms, et cetera, to kind of support all of that. And so what do? In the alternative, we set up what's effectively this plea bargain system where we arrest all these people, we charge them with crimes, we overcharge them, which means that somebody might do something that, whether you can charge them with like this higher crime is kind of tenuous or waffler at best, but you say this crime that we're saying you committed, there might be this other charge that's like more severe, and what you did might meet the elements of this charge, and we're going to charge you with this charge.
Yeah.
And all these other, like what they call lesser includeds, right? To kind of leverage also a plea deal. So
It's like a bastardized version of like shoot for the moon, fall among the stars.
So if somebody does something like, let's say somebody's driving drunk and they kill somebody, unfortunately, like they might get charged with, I don't know, some version of murder, right? Versus like manslaughter.
Right.
Because the appropriate charge might be some sort of manslaughter charge, like, I don't know, criminally reckless driving or something like that, which is a manslaughter charge. But they say, no, we could potentially meet these elements of a murder charge based on what you did. Maybe not murder one, but murder two.
Yeah.
Right. So they say, we're overcharging you with murder too. And then also these lesser includeds. So now when you're sitting there, you don't have the resources to pay for a private criminal attorney. You have a public defender. You're facing all these charges. The prosecutor is like, you're facing murder charges. That's like 25 to life. But if you want to take a plea, we can maybe plead this down to 10 years or 15 years. And if you might know you could be innocent. So like, it might not be a driving charge. Like, let's say they're saying you committed an armed robbery charge and somebody died in the course of that robbery, and you didn't do it. Well, they said, we have all this circumstantial evidence that points to you. We have eyewitness testimony, your footprints at the scene, this, that, the third. And like, you're sitting there, somebody who knows you're innocent, but now they're overcharging you with all these crimes. And they're saying you're facing 25 years behind bars with no opportunity for parole. You might be inclined to take a plea deal just to avoid going to trial and potentially getting found guilty, even though you didn't do it. So it's not just the people who actually did something who are being overcharged and then accepting plea deals so they don't run the risk of going to trial and getting convicted of this higher charge. It's not just those people. It's people who are completely innocent who have been unfairly arrested and charged with a crime. And the prosecution does the same thing because kind of to something that we talked about earlier, like you like to think people are innocent until proven guilty, right? But that's not always the case. And so, especially like in America, if you look a certain way, if you're black or brown, that if you get arrested and charged with a crime and you get trotted out to trial and there's a quote unquote jury of your peers sitting there, they're all going to think that the simple fact that you got arrested and you're being tried for this crime
means you're guilty.
Or at least there's a high likelihood of being guilty. Because that's the other thing, like, I think the average person doesn't understand how much like implicit bias pervades the mind of the average juror in criminal cases and
that was going to be what surprised me about it, because I had jury duty the next week when we filmed that episode. And so I was like, I didn't really know what to expect. So it was really cool to hear from people who've worked both civil and criminal cases as plaintiffs' attorneys and as public defenders, like what makes a good juror. And I was shocked at how much they wanted people to be so forthright and honest, especially when it was about things that were so, like opinions that, I mean, definitely I don't hold, but like that's, if someone's really racist, they want to see that so that they can get rid of that person if that doesn't make sense for the trial. That will really impede justice being done. So it was really interesting and surprising to hear like what went into a good jury and how, as like Saad was talking about, like how upfront and honest he is as a lawyer standing there being like, what do you think of me? And like, I just didn't even really think about that process of jury selection and how much that goes into all of these other factors.
That's probably, if not the most important factor, one of the most important factors when trying a case, whether it's criminal or civil, is trying to elicit and suss out bias and implicit bias. And oftentimes people aren't even aware of biases they carry, but as you question them, some things might bubble to the surface, or they are aware, but it's just a matter of like making them comfortable enough to actually say it in front of their peers, in front of the other attorney, et cetera. But it might be a tough thing to do, but we have to do it, because I think for me as a plaintiff personal injury attorney, there's defense attorneys that we work against as a prosecutor, a criminal prosecutor, or as a criminal defense attorney. Everybody should all want the same thing, which is a jury of 12 people who are completely unbiased. Even though that might be a hard thing to achieve, we should all want that, because both sides should want the jurors to come in with an open mind, listen only to the evidence, and then render a verdict based on the evidence. But I think oftentimes also in America, in the criminal justice system, the prosecution will take advantage of the fact that they know how a lot of jurors are going to look at black and brown people in criminal cases. And they know if they trot a defendant out there, a black or brown defendant out there in a trial, the jurors are like, the criminal defense attorney and the criminal defendant are going to be behind the 8 ball starting off. And so that's another reason why this, I think, plea bargain system is so effective, in the sense that, like, you get innocent people who are willing to take plea deals because they're getting overcharged with crimes, and they're so afraid of going to trial and getting found guilty and having to do 20, 25 years or something like that. And then people who actually have committed a crime, but they're getting overcharged still, and then getting leveraged into taking plea deals because they're getting overcharged. Because, like, if somebody commits a crime and the maximum sentence for that crime is 10 years, but then if you look at all these factors and you determine that maybe this person, they should only do 2 years or 3 years, but instead of that, you're also going to overcharge them with another crime and say, you could be facing 25 years, so you should take this 10 years. It's like, it's skewing the system, right? And so I think that's like a big takeaway from the conversation that I had that we had with Saad and Dan, in terms of the criminal justice system. And then I think, as somewhat of like a sidebar or a corollary, is how we think about criminal justice. And like the criminal justice system in America is really based on retribution versus rehabilitation. Oh, and I think there are organizations out there and people out there who are, much smarter than I am in this arena, who devote much more time into thinking about this topic. But I think people also might want to start thinking about maybe the end goal of the criminal justice system should not be quote unquote retribution. It should be rehabilitation, because the retribution system hasn't really worked, right? Like the recidivism rates are, I don't know what they are off the top of my head. I'm sure people can look them up, but like recidivism rates aren't good. Recidivism meaning people who commit a crime, go to prison, come out, and then commit another crime. Yeah. So if the idea is that this punishment is going to be so punitive that they're never going to think about committing a crime again, it's like, no, obviously that's not what's happening. And in fact, what we see is actually the opposite. People who go to prison and spend like an appreciable amount of time in prison actually become better criminals because they're talking to other criminals, they're learning things like.
And also, who is it really serving, right? I mean, like, we know that there's for-profit.
Well, now, there's also the prison industrial complex, which is another prong. Like, I think it was what is it, that the 13th Amendment documentary was out, the one on Netflix that was about that. So like, that's another thing that people should consider, which kind of goes back to people thinking more critically, thinking with nuance, taking more control over yourself as like an informed voting
and also,
citizen.
Honestly, like, even if it's not just thinking critically, just follow the money.
Yeah.
Who's making money? Like, these people getting sentenced to 20 years, like, they are not making money in prison. Yeah. But people are making money off of them. And if you look back at when did the prison industrial complex begin? I mean, after slavery. Yeah. And like, what does it do? It strips your right to vote, which is one of your main So there's a lot of aspects of the system that, especially hearing from public defenders, is just how they all convalesce at the end to make it just a truly unjust system is frightening.
Well, that was also like a small, but I think very important, very poinient moment in Sinners, right? Shout out Ryan Coogler. There was
we should just make this a film and TV thought at the end of the day.
But it was the scene where they were all in the car and they were driving, right? It was like, I think the twins and Preacher Boy and Delroy Lindo, right? And they were driving along the side of the road, and then they drive past the chain gang. And it's like the 5 or 6 black dudes who are chained together, and they're out there on the side of the road with the pickaxes, and like the guys there on the horse, like the overseer, whatever. And, they're driving by and like, I think Delroy Lindo like stands up and is like, stay strong or something like that. Cause like that was the genesis of it, right? Of like that whole prison industrial complex and chain gangs and forced labor and stuff like that. And so like that stuff's been going on for a long time. And I think there's no better time than the present to start thinking about how we can unwind some of these things, that these like racially motivated constructs that have been baked in to this country for so long.
And that we have so embedded in thinking that is a system that works, when it's like, well, no, it was built to not work because it works for one group of people. And I know we'll get to our conversation about immigration law later, but I mean, talking about unlawful detaining, I mean, or lawful detaining being something that's inherently awful. But okay, wrapping up this section with the criminal justice system. There was a new, obviously semi-new, and by the time this airs, will be not new at all. But what was interesting, we had a conversation about the Diddy trial, and your take on it was kind of interesting because it actually, even though the verdict it wasn't like what people necessarily wanted, it's a great example of, and you can speak a little bit more into like the specifics of like what the DA charged and really overcharged him with, and they didn't actually make their case. Can you talk about kind of like what your mini thesis on that was? Yeah,
I mean, I didn't follow that trial, super closely. From what I read and remember, he was not convicted of the most serious charges
of RICO,
right? And so I think of RICO and also like trafficking. Yeah, and so
I think they only got him on prostitution.
Right? It's like something like that.
Only prostitution.
Yeah, and I think regardless of what people think about Sean Combs, the trial, like a trial shouldn't necessarily be a referendum on what we think about a person or what their public persona is or anything along those lines. A trial is about, in a criminal trial, whether the prosecution can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And in this case, I think myself included, like I had at the beginning of the trial, I had a strong belief he would get convicted of everything because historically the federal prosecutor's office, like the U.S. attorney or whatever, their conviction rate or success rate is like something crazy. It's like 98 or 99%, which is basically like if they come after you, they don't miss. And especially if they go to trial, because a trial is already such a public thing, but then a trial with a public figure. So my take on it at the very beginning was they're not going to bring these charges and have this trial unless they think they can nail this guy, right? And so I think this trial is a perfect example of even federal prosecutors can fail to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And again, regardless of what people might think of Sean Combs, they fail to meet their burden. And so this is, to me, an example of the criminal justice system working in the sense of he elected to go to trial because I think there were plea offers. Like I'm relatively sure there were plea offers. He turned them down. He said, I'll take my chances. I'll go to trial. And they failed to make their case on all of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. And therefore the criminal justice system worked because the prosecution has the burden. The defendant doesn't have the burden. Like the prosecution has the burden to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's a very high bar.
And if you looked at like most of the coverage, most of the testimonies, most of it was covering his character. And it was like a fantastic character assassination. I mean, awful person, did awful things, but like they couldn't, in no way did it really seem to build to racketeering. And maybe they got like, they touched on trafficking, but not in a way clearly that a jury was like, for sure, he did that.
I think without following it too closely from the outside looking in, it just seemed like they were banking on, we're going to paint such a terrible picture of this person that the jurors are going to vote to convict him of everything that we're saying. Plus, from what I also remember, like on the eve of like when the prosecution rested and then the defense rested and the case was going to go to the jury, I think at a certain point, the prosecution, like they didn't necessarily drop some charges, but I think they said there were some charges that they weren't going to pursue or something like that. So I think, because to me, I was like, well, why is all of this stuff coming in? Like a lot of the character evidence stuff that I would have thought wasn't relevant. I'm like, why is this even being allowed? Like, for example, all the stuff about Kid Cudi, like, oh, he blew up his car, like allegedly, right? Like he blew up his car. Like, I don't want to get sued, like, oh, he blew up his car or he did this or he did that, whatever. But like, he's not getting charged
How is that
doing all
relevant
these things to Kid Cudi, right?
case?
How is that relevant to this case? How is that relevant to RICO charges, right? And so I think the prosecution might have had some elements of some crimes that they could arguably say this testimony goes to these elements, but then on the eve of trial, like they dropped those elements of the crime too. So it's like that also kind of indicates that this was a poor plan and, poor, I think, execution from the beginning. Is like you kind of thought all these salacious details were going to carry the day. And then on the eve of the case going to the jurors, you either realized at that point or already knew that you weren't even going to move forward with these elements of this crime. So like the only reason you wanted to elicit this testimony is to like paint a negative picture of this person's character in the hopes that the jury would just then say, this guy's just a terrible person, he's guilty. And that didn't happen. So again, I think
the justice system worked.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's entitled to a defense, right? Everybody has a right to a trial. Everybody has a right to a jury of their peers. So again, like it's not a referendum on Sean Combs as a person.
Right.
This is the criminal justice.
Right. He definitely lost in the court of public opinion.
I think that's for sure. Like I would say there were some people that probably already felt a certain way about Sean Combs even before this trial started, like even before the Cassie video came out. Like I think over the years, like he's been involved in situations that haven't always painted him in the best light. And I think that it hasn't always, like I wouldn't necessarily say even before this trial, people looked upon him favorably, right? I think some people probably did, but I think the bloom had probably been off the rose a little bit with him already because of things that had happened that had even preceded, like the Cassie tape coming out and the criminal trial. So the interesting question, I think, is he's still awaiting sentencing, right, in October. So we'll see how long he gets sentenced. And then when he gets out, what's his real second act going to be? Because once he's out, then I think you're kind of going to see how the public receives him once he's actually back out in public.
Should we actually have a rehabilitative system, ideally that kind of person actually gets to work through and change and hopefully, repent for a lot of the stuff that he did. But unfortunately, that's not really how our system works.
I think that's even aside from how our system works, that's not necessarily how America works, right? Like America loves a quote unquote comeback story. I think a lot of times in America,
I mean, Army Hammer's out here talking about eating people again and poisoning people. I don't know who's letting him talk.
I think America isn't necessarily the beacon of morality or kind of, I guess, holding people to account who might have exhibited moral failings, right? Like I think America is the land of second chances. It's a land of clickbait. It's a land of second opportunities. And I think that goes back years. Yeah. Like America has always been the land of reinvention. Like I think if you look back at F. Scott Fitzgerald's A Great Gatsby, right? That's who Gatsby was, just a reinvention of whoever that guy was. Like I think Jay Gatsby or Jay Gats, whatever his name was in the book. Like that was the whole thing with Gatsby, right? Like no one knew who he was, where he came from, how he made this money, like what his story was. And then like he would always have like these fanciful stories of like, I did this, I did that. Like I was, fought in this war. I got this commendation. I did this, blah, blah, blah. And like, I think even in that book, you see how, especially back then, before there was like the internet and the ability to like fact check people or like know so much about people, like America has always been the place of you can come here from anywhere else or even be born here and be born to certain means and reinvent yourself in a way that like rises above those means and allows you to quote unquote take control of your own narrative And if you do it successfully enough, like if you become successful, if you do it successfully enough, like people will believe it. And so I think whether it's Sean Combs or anybody else, like America has been very forgiving in that sense. Like I think even if you look at our current president, right, like that guy has a lot of, in my opinion, not so great checks on his resume, and he's a 2-time president. So we're not necessarily the best at holding people accountable for perceived moral failings.
No. No. That's a great place to end for here. We really are the podcast of a bleak future. Okay, cool. Let's move on to our third point. So I think some of the most harrowing and timely things that we talked about were definitely in our conversation with Marissa.
Yeah.
Which I just wanted to tie back to a moment from our conversation with Saad and Daniel, where Saad was talking about how in post 9/11, the FBI was infiltrating a lot of mosques. There's a fantastic Hassan Minhaj skit. He kind of got roasted for it later on because it didn't technically happen to him, but I definitely recommend watching this skit about Brother Eric, this big white dude that was infiltrating mosques in NorCal. And just sort of this terror that Muslim Americans were experiencing in really the 10 to 15 to still ongoing years. And we saw that also with Guantanamo Bay and a lot of what Bush's administration was doing in honestly creating a lot of roadway for what Trump is now doing with immigration issues. So anyway, all of that to say, I wanted to get your take on our conversation with Marissa. Obviously, you are not an immigration attorney, and it sounds like immigration law is changing every day at this point. What stood out to you from that conversation?
I think, again, from a broader perspective, just how easy it is for Americans to kind of sleepwalk and lose their civil liberties. And I think kind of tying back to what Saad talked about, like in the wake of 9/11, I think is when the Patriot Act arose.
You know, the FBI was just all over the Muslim community during the whole, 10, 15 years after 9/11. I personally, I have really funny experiences with the FBI at my mosque. I remember very, very, very specifically a moment where I went to my own mosque in around 2005, I think. I was around 17, and me and my cousin went to the mosque in Santa Clara. Big community, one of the bigger communities, Muslim communities in America. And we walked in, and there's this guy, this white guy we've never seen before. And he just had the whole outfit, He was ready. He had
windbreak, right? And so under the Patriot Act, that's kind of what was the genesis of like the government spying on American citizens, authorizing surveillance practices that like had before that time not been utilized or considered. And it just led to like a heightened surveillance domestically and abroad of people. And I think what ended up happening is because the Patriot Act had an expiration date, and then every time it would come up to expire, it would just get voted to be extended and extended and extended. And I think every successive president kept rubber stamping the Patriot Act, including Obama, from what I remember. And I think kind of what you mentioned as well, it's like it's been a direct line to where we are now and where we sit now with the current administration. We have like American troops that are being deployed on American soil to do things like, perform raids on quote unquote illegal aliens, right? And now I think even as an extension of that, like we see what's happening in, I think it's Washington, D.C., right, where they deployed, who is it, like the National Guard of the National Police or something like that in Washington, D.C. to clean up the city. And then the commander in chief, which I hesitate to even say that or even use his name, like he gave a speech where he said, it's not just D.C., it's also going to be like Oakland and Dallas, I think. And it's like, starts like naming all these, of course, black cities, right? And so what is clean up the streets? I mean, it's like you're playing into these stereotypes and these tropes of like these cities that are predominantly black
also
cities being like
statistically
lawless.
lower in crime right now than ever before.
Yeah.
So it is a trumped up problem.
Especially, I think, in those three cities, I think like DC, Chicago,
It's the lowest crime rate
and
ever.
Detroit, yeah.
In years.
And so, exactly. And so I think the mayor of DC, Muriel Bowser, I think she said that, like she's been on record as saying that.
And I guess like to go back to this like thesis we're drawing, like from the Patriot Act to, deploying the military as against citizens, which is directly against what the military advises, since they're like, we are a aid to foreign threats, not domestic.
Yeah.
But this push and overreach of federal power, and this, at the end of the day, really like constriction of civil liberties when there are threats, and this threat, right, like seems to be able to be curated when needed. Now, obviously, post 9/11, like there was a terrorist attack. Did that mean that what the Bush administration and later other administrations allowed to happen was the right move? Not for me to say necessarily, but like what we're seeing even now, right, this continued stretch into what we are or are not allowed to do. And really, as a populace so far, I've not really had a say in whether or not, I mean, I guess technically we said it with our vote, but like,
unfortunately,
yeah. What will we say again in 2028? I don't know.
Or even 2026 with
in
the
our midterms, yeah.
Because I think the midterms aren't looking very favorable for the Democrat Party right now.
We are the I think it's like the lowest
consider.
registration of Democratic voters in a very long time. So, yikes. Again, bleak. That's our color.
We have fun stuff coming, I promise.
Yes, we'll talk about sports eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, going back, I think what was your take on kind of like what Marissa was sharing about this constriction of this continual upheaval of certain liberties, as well as things that, like seeking asylum isn't like, that's not new. That's a practice that we've had in this country for a very long time. We did it during what was going on in Ukraine. We have consistently let asylum seekers and refugees into the country. That's shut down. These disparate issues that are coming up that we're seeing with like Alligator Alcatraz, or plainclothed agents coming into homes. And there was one story that came up post our conversation. Did you hear about the Mahmoud Khalil? He was the Palestinian student at Columbia that was like running a lot of their. He was kind of like the voice of the protest over at Columbia.
Okay.
Anyway, he got like really doxxed by different groups, and obviously there's a lot of tensions with that to begin with. But what was really scary is he's a green card holder. They revoked that green card, and so he was detained.
Yeah.
For over 100 days, and we're seeing things that like that. How is that legal? How is that allowed to happen? Yeah. And they were able to revoke it based on the fact that they were like, well, you're a threat to our national security. So again, we're seeing this constant new makeup of laws and rules when they suit the administration's whims.
Well, I think what we're really seeing, and this kind of tracks back to something we talked about earlier in terms of checks and balances and like legislative, judiciary, executive. You're seeing somebody who's very invested in kind of dismantling the civics in our country, if you want to call it that, or our political system and how it's been constructed and run really since the inception of the country. And so when you have somebody who's doing that from the top, and then you have those two other branches, the judiciary and the legislative, that are also kind of working in tandem with him to be able to do some of these things.
Or just not doing anything at all.
Well, that's also working in tandem with him, right? By not doing anything, like not pushing back, not calling him to account, not doing anything to kind of stop this runaway train. And when he sees he can do whatever he wants and be successful and not really get checked or called out for it, he's going to continue doing it. And then the people around him who are invested in him remaining in power and who like what he's doing, they're going to keep doing what they're doing as well. Because, he's put people in place around him that are like-minded or have the same type of ideology. And those people are also going to use that to their advantage to push their agenda.
He's not hiding who he admires.
Yeah.
Like, was it yesterday he was talking about how he wished the American populace would treat him as Kim Jong-un, that they would sit up with a raft detention. Or Putin.
Yeah.
Like, it only took Putin a year to dismantle Russia's very destabilized already government, but what they had, tried to put in place by the time he got into power. So, like, it is authoritarianism at its finest, right, to dismantle it.
I also saw a story last week about voting machines, how he wants to, I think, get rid of voting machines and the use of voting machines in elections because they're so prone to error or misuse or things like that.
While this ongoing New York case is happening that is attempting to prove fraud.
But he's a bull in a china shop. But the problem is nobody's really putting him in check. So then it just emboldens him to keep doing more and more and more of these types of things. And so again, like, to me, it really tracks back to the populace, how we vote, how we use our vote to put people in office who are not going to allow these types of things to happen from the president down, because he was also able to kind of put into the populate the Supreme Court with sycophants or like-minded people who also aren't interested in holding him to account or putting a check on the things that he's doing. So I think we've wound up in a situation where we really don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not entirely optimistic about the direction we're heading as a country or the ability to really rein him in. I think the midterm elections are going to be very telling, because if it doesn't demonstrate some sort of sea change in terms of the political ideology of like where we're headed, like it's going to be.
And again, they're not even trying to hide the blatant gerrymandering.
Yeah.
We have him saying, I need more seats, get me more seats. And as much as Newsom trying to, hold special elections is important, right? Like, we at least have some people trying to speak out against it. I guess, like, to me, I don't even think there was anything necessarily surprising about the conversation with Marissa. Just how
it actually is that bleak out there.
Yeah.
It actually is that disheartening. Right. Yeah. But like, I think one of the positives or like the bright spots is people like her still exist.
Yes.
There's people out there who are doing the work and standing up for what they believe in, standing up on behalf of people, fighting back against a corrupt and overbearing system.
And doing it in such a brilliant way. Yeah. Like, I mean, I guess, actually, no, I'll take this back. I didn't know she had created the LMU clinic while she was still in law school and then built it up to be this binational effort now. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
So I was fangirling personally. Yeah. But I think, that's a really good, got to take a positive spin somewhere.
Yeah. And also, like, the more either, us or other institutions can get out stories like hers or similar stories, it's inspiring to people who can see those stories and realize that it's not all bleak. Like, there are people out there who are trying to make a difference, and those stories can inspire other listeners, viewers, readers
and to humanize this whole piece, right? Like, the stories that she was sharing about clients that she's working with, like a mom not being able to go to her son's funeral. Like, I say what you want to say about what your stances are on immigration. Like, I still think at the end of the day, most people want to treat others with dignity.
Yeah.
And I think we can all of the capacity, and we should enforce that our government does the same thing. That we should be treating everybody with dignity, whether or not we agree with the policy. I think the biggest thing we can possibly all agree on is that it's not being done with care or thought. Or dignity or integrity for these people.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm excited to see what her clinic can do, and especially with I did not know about auto deportations, especially for countries that we don't have treaties, like Venezuela or Vietnam. These people that are essentially being disappeared, a term I really didn't think, I'd hear again in this country. Though it's happened many times. We saw that in Japanese internment camps. We saw it post 9/11. Like, it has absolutely happened and clearly continues to happen. I think the kind of nuanced work that she does is so critical, and like really being the person on the phone, trying to make sure this person has a at least somewhat safe place to go, is really beautiful. Yeah.
Agreed.
So anything, I guess, that's happened since that has made you kind of think back to that conversation, other than everything?
Yeah, not necessarily. I just think we just have to continue to be vigilant, right? And however we can make our voices heard, to, I think, stand up on behalf of other people, stand up for what's right. Let politicians know that how we as a citizenry feel about what's going on and the direction of the country. Because I think it's very important right now. I mean, in California, of course, we have a huge immigrant population.
Yeah.
And so we see it firsthand really here. And we see stories every day of how what's going on in the country are affecting like people we know or family members, friends, clients. And it's heartbreaking, because to me, what this country was founded on, like, what does it say on the Statue of Liberty, right? It says, bring us your poor, you're hungry, you're tired. I think those yearning to be free, or something like that, right? And like, people still come here because they believe in the idea of the American dream. They believe in the idea of being able to better themselves, to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, to make something of themselves, to create an opportunity for a better life for their children. Like, it's easy for somebody like the commander in chief to paint all these people with a broad brush and say they're bad hombres, they're criminals, they're this or that. We know they're not that.
Yep.
We know these are our friends, or neighbors, or teachers, or whatever. They're people who, again, they're just trying to make a better life for themselves and their kids. And they should be given and allowed the opportunity to do that here in America.
Yeah. I mean, this country was literally founded
Yes.
by immigrants. So, although that, I guess, won't be the historical narrative now with PragerU. So I don't know what we'll be saying at this point. Let's keep it ending on a positive note. Yes.
This podcast is brought to you by Adamson Ahdoot LLP. Hosted by Christopher Adamson. Produced by Lauren Henning and Chris Weigen. If you have thoughts or suggestions, email us at itspersonal@aa.law. The views, opinions, and statements expressed by guests on this podcast represent the personal perspectives of the individual speakers and do not constitute official positions of Adamson Ahdoot LLP or its attorneys, staff, or affiliates. Nothing discussed creates an attorney-client relationship, and the content is provided for general informational and educational purposes only. Always consult with a qualified attorney about your specific circumstances.